She was 17 years old, cycling home from a part-time job on a November evening in suburban Saitama, a few minutes from her front door. An ordinary Tuesday night in 1988. She never made it home. What happened next unfolded inside a house in Tokyo, over 44 days, beneath the notice of a city of millions. Adults lived in the same building. They heard what was happening. They said nothing. When Junko Furuta's body was finally found, it was encased in concrete inside a steel drum, abandoned in a vacant lot near the bay. The case is considered the worst act of juvenile violence in Japan's post-war history. The 4 teenagers primarily responsible served between 5 and 20 years each. At least 3 of them went on to commit more crimes after their release. This is what happened. Junko Furuta was born on January 18, 1971, and grew up in Misato, Saitama Prefecture. She lived with her parents and 2 brothers and, by every account, was a well-regarded student, good grades, strong attendance, popular with both teachers and classmates. She held a part-time job. She dreamed of becoming an idol singer, the way many teenagers of that era did. On the evening of November 25, 1988, Furuta was cycling home from work when 2 teenagers on motorcycles rode through the area with the deliberate intent to target women. Hiroshi Miyano, 18, and his associate, Shinji Minato, 16, had been circling the neighborhood looking for victims. On Miyano's instruction, Minato rode alongside Furuta and kicked her bicycle out from under her. He then fled. Miyano played the helpful stranger. He rode up as if he'd just happened to witness the attack, expressed concern and offered to walk her home. She had no reason not to trust him. He appeared to be on her side. He was not. After gaining enough of her trust to get her moving, Miyano took her to a nearby warehouse. There, he threatened her. He told her he was connected to the Yakuza and made clear that refusing to cooperate would have consequences for her and her family. Terrified, Furuta complied. She was then taken to the home of Minato's family in the Ayase district of Adachi Ward, Tokyo. That house is where she would remain for the next 44 days. The 4 primary perpetrators, Miyano, Minato, Joe Ogura, 17, and Yasushi Watanabe, 17, subjected Furuta to repeated sexual violence and escalating torture across those weeks. In the early days, the 4 forced her to telephone her parents and tell them she had voluntarily run away from home. She made the call. That single act effectively halted the police investigation for months, because Furuta herself had stated she was fine. Her parents reported her missing, but there was little investigators could do when the missing person had called to say she wasn't. 2 additional participants, Tetsuo Nakamura and Koichi Ihara, both 16, were also later identified as involved. It's said that others were brought to the house over the course of the captivity as well. On January 1, 1989, New Year's Day, Furuta had been held for 37 days. She could no longer stand or move from the floor. On January 4, 1989, the perpetrators beat her with an iron barbell. She was also set on fire. Junko Furuta died that day. She was 17 years old, and it was the 44th day of her captivity. The following evening, the group wrapped her body in a blanket, placed it in a large travel bag, and then into a steel drum. They filled it with wet concrete. That night, they drove to a vacant lot near Wakasu Island in Koto Ward, on the edge of Tokyo Bay, and left the drum there. For months, no one knew where she was. The investigation that eventually broke this case open began with an entirely different crime. In December 1988, just weeks after Furuta's abduction, Miyano and Ogura kidnapped and gang-raped a 19-year-old woman. Both were arrested for that offense in early 1989. During police interrogation, Miyano apparently came to believe that Ogura had already confessed to the Furuta murder, that the investigation had already reached that point. Acting on that mistaken assumption, Miyano disclosed the location of the body himself. He was wrong about what Ogura had said, but his disclosure was enough. On March 30, 1989, investigators located the concrete-filled steel drum in the vacant lot at Wakasu. The concrete had to be broken apart to recover her remains. Junko Furuta had been there for nearly 3 months. From there, the full scope of what had happened inside the Minato house emerged through interrogation. One element of the captivity has continued to disturb people ever since. Minato's parents lived in the building where Furuta was held, directly above where she was kept. According to testimony that emerged in the investigation, they were aware, at least in part, of what was happening in their own home. Multiple accounts indicate that Miyano had extended his threats beyond the immediate group, warning Minato's family of what would happen to them if they contacted police. The parents said nothing for 44 days. Their son's home was the crime scene, and they lived upstairs. Furuta reportedly made at least one attempt to reach out to a neighbor. It came to nothing. The question of why requires starting with the person who built the conditions for it. Hiroshi Miyano was 18 at the time of the abduction and was already a known delinquent in the Ayase area. Someone with an established reputation for violence and, it's said, connections to criminal networks, possibly adjacent to organized crime. The precise nature of any Yakuza ties was never officially established in court records. What is clearly established is that Miyano commanded genuine fear from those around him. The other perpetrators deferred to him. The family in the building did not call police because they were reportedly afraid of the consequences. Others who came to the house during the captivity appear also to have been afraid to refuse or to speak to authorities afterward. That architecture of fear explains how 44 days became possible. Miyano's capacity to intimidate created concentric rings of silence. The other perpetrators, the family upstairs, the neighbors, the people who came and left. For the three perpetrators other than Miyano, what held them in place appears to have been a combination of coercion and deepening complicity. Once they had participated in the initial crimes, going to police meant exposing themselves. Every passing day added to the weight of what they had already done and made the prospect of stopping feel more dangerous than continuing. This doesn't excuse their choices. They made active decisions every day across those 44 days. But it explains how the situation held together. There is also a structural factor that loomed over the aftermath. Japan's juvenile law as it existed in 1988 imposed meaningful ceilings on punishment for anyone under 20. It's been reported, though this is not confirmed from any official record, that Miyano was aware of how the juvenile system operated and understood that his youth offered some degree of protection. Whether that calculation was ever explicit in his thinking cannot be verified. But the public debate that followed the case kept returning to it, because it raised a harder question. What happens when the system's own protections become a resource for those who exploit them? Let me be clear, as I always am in this section, nothing here is a clinical diagnosis. What follows is interpretive commentary, based on testimony, journalism, and the criminological analysis this case has generated over more than 3 decades. What the Furuta case illustrates, psychologically, is one of the clearest real-world examples of what researchers call de-individuation, the process by which individual moral identity gets submerged within a group context. Studies of group violence consistently find that people participate in acts under collective conditions that they would almost certainly refuse alone. The mechanism is well understood. Shared participation distributes guilt. An authority figure grants permission, and each incremental escalation makes the next one feel less transgressive than it should. Miyano is the pivot point. He was not simply the oldest, he was the established authority, the source of both permission and threat. For the other perpetrators, his presence appears to have performed 2 functions simultaneously. It authorized the violence, and it made dissent feel more dangerous than participation. That double bind is extremely effective at sustaining group behavior far past the point where individual conscience would otherwise stop it. There's also the escalation dynamic. The violence Furuta endured was not a single act, but a process, unfolding across 44 days. And processes have an internal logic. Once committed to the initial crimes, the internal incentives for the perpetrators all push toward continuation rather than withdrawal. This is why these situations are so difficult to interrupt from within. What's also significant about this case is the failure of the rings outside the perpetrators themselves. Minato's parents, the people who visited the house, the neighbor. Each of these was a moment when someone outside the core group could have intervened and didn't. The common thread appears to have been Miyano's capacity to create fear that extended well beyond the people directly involved. In a social environment where his threats were believable, ordinary self-interest repeatedly overrode the impulse to act. And at the center of all of it was a 17-year-old girl who, according to accounts that emerged later, still believed at points during the captivity that she might be released. She cooperated when forced to. She prayed. She endured what was happening to her day by day in a city of millions, in a house where adults lived upstairs, heard everything, and chose silence. The trial took place in 1990. All 4 primary defendants pleaded guilty, but not to murder. The charge was inflicting bodily injury resulting in death, a distinction that significantly constrained the available sentences under Japan's juvenile justice framework. Miyano received 17 years, increased to 20 on appeal. Ogura received approximately 8 years. Minato received between 5 and 9 years. Watanabe received between 5 and 7 years. The public response in Japan was a wave of sustained specific outrage. Petitions circulated, editorials called for the system to change. The Japanese magazine Shukan Shincho, after tracking the subsequent arrests of multiple perpetrators, called the outcome a defeat of the juvenile law. Those subsequent crimes arrived in the years following release. Ogura was arrested in 1999 for assault and unlawful confinement of a woman, and again in 2004 for attempted murder. Minato was arrested in 2018, 30 years after the murder, for an alleged street attack on a man with a metal baton and knife during a parking dispute. He was convicted in 2019 and received a 1-year 6-month sentence, suspended with probation. Miyano was reportedly arrested in 2013 in connection with a phone fraud scheme targeting elderly victims, though the full details of that case were not made widely public. Watanabe, the youngest of the primary perpetrators at the time of sentencing, died in May 2021 at the age of 49. The Furuta case was one of several high-profile juvenile crimes in Japan during the late 1980s and 1990s that together pushed the country towards significant legal reform. Japan's year 2000 revisions to the juvenile law lowered the minimum age at which serious offenders could be prosecuted in adult courts and expanded the grounds for transferring juvenile cases from family court to criminal court. Those reforms have continued to be amended since, and the question of how the legal system should respond to severe violence by young offenders remains genuinely contested in Japan. None of it brought Junko Furuta home. What stays with me thinking about this case is not just the violence, it's the number of moments when it could have been stopped. The adults in the building, the neighbors, the people who came to the house and walked away without calling anyone. 44 days, and within each day, multiple choices made by multiple people. Ordinary fear. Fear of a teenager, fear of confrontation, fear of what exposure might cost, was enough to keep a city from saving one person. Her name was Junko Furuta. She was 17 years old. She had good grades, people who loved her, and plans for her life. She deserved to get home that November night. Thank you for watching. If you want to understand more about the cases that shape Japan's legal history, subscribe and stay with us. These stories are worth understanding.